Hello. Good to see everyone. Our study is in history of the Church of the Bible. Now, if we're really going to understand church history, we have to understand to some extent the world that the church confronted and the world that Jesus came into. What kind of world was it? We talked about this a little bit last time. All kinds of people from all parts of the world. Traders were all over Jerusalem trading their goods. There were mystic religions. Life was so hard because of the cruel Roman Empire. I want to tell you, if you think the fake news is pessimistic, they're optimists compared to these people. I mean, it was a pessimistic outlook on the world. And so the only hope that these mystics thought they had was in the next life. But you had to know all these special cantations, and you had to know all of these mystery things before you could even be involved in it. And so you have this you're having to confront. There was so many that believed in many different Greek philosophies, all kinds of pagans. If you've ever been to Jamaica, Larry will tell you, I mean, you'd be walking down the road and here comes a big old cow. Nobody cares. Goats, oxen, go right down the middle of the street. I asked a lady one time, I said, have y'all ever heard of health laws? What'd you say, Mon? I said, don't worry about it. It was a third world country, and people were just all mixed in together, and Jesus came into that kind of world. Now you got the temple. Who first built the temple? Anybody? Starts with an S. Solomon. David wanted to, but God said, no, you're a man of war. Your son Solomon's going to do it. So Solomon built this temple. Well, it was destroyed in 586 BC by the Babylonians. Then they came back and built it up after they came back from captivity. Then the Herod family came on the scene in Jerusalem. Herod the Great. There wasn't much great about him. He was very immoral, a murderer, and many other words we could say. We won't say in public, but he was not a very nice person. He came in, but he did have a great building program. He said, I'm going to rebuild that temple. 40 years they worked on the construction of that temple. 40 long years they worked. And when they worked, it wasn't like today, 6 to 8 hours, 5 days a week. I mean, those people toiled and labored because most of it was slave labor. And if you didn't keep up your load, you were punished. And so 40 years they built on this temple. It was one of the ancient, in the ancient world, as one of the wonders of the world. It was a fabulous structure. Do you remember in Matthew 24, all the disciples came to Jesus and they were showing him how beautiful the temple was? And Jesus said, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, there's not going to be one stone left." Because in 70 AD, who destroyed Herod's temple? The Roman Empire, under the leadership of a man named Titus. And when you see that archway going into Rome, Titus stole that from Jerusalem. It's still over there. And I mean, when he destroyed something, when the Romans got it in for you, there's not much hope for you. I mean, they just destroyed people. And they completely destroyed the temple. They destroyed all the records of the temple. They burned the city. They tore down the walls. They ruined everything. That's why the Jews to this day do not have a priesthood. In the Old Testament, you read about their priest. They don't have a priesthood now, because you had to be from the tribe of Levi. Well, nobody knows now because Rome destroyed all the records. So that temple was destroyed in 70 AD, and Jesus foretold that in Matthew chapter 24. You got these Jews that are all divided up into different segments. And that's what I want us to talk about, is this problem that Jesus ran across. Now, as far as world trade, commerce, opening up the world, everybody, Rome did a wonderful job of that. But when Jesus came on the scene, God's people had split into several different groups. Now, the most prominent and most popular was the Pharisees. Now, these people were quite religious, but everything they did in religion was for somebody to look at them. Look how religious I am. The Jews would wear this little box on their head that had little scriptures in it from the Mosaic Law. Well, the Pharisees made their box bigger than everybody else's box. I mean, that's the kind of people we're looking at here. They had these special seats when they had feast days. Well, the Pharisees always had to occupy those seats because they loved that attention from their religion. And I want you to look how Jesus talked about these people in Matthew chapter 23. I hope you brought your Bible with you tonight. Matthew chapter 23. Now notice what he said in verse 1. The scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. All right, what that meant in ancient times was they were teaching what? The law of Moses. And when they taught the law of Moses, Jesus taught, you listen to that. When the law is being taught, when my law is being taught that I gave through Moses, you listen to that. But notice what he said in verse number 3. All therefore whatsoever they bid you, observe. What's taught out of my law, you do it. Whether you like them, whether you don't like them, whether you think they're a hypocrite, which they were, whatever you think of them, if they teach you something out of God's law, you better listen to it. He said that, observe, and do. But do not after their works. When they teach you from God's law, you better listen to it. But don't act like they act. Don't do as they do, for they say and do not. That's like I told you the other night. That's like somebody smoking a cigarette telling you how, son, it's terrible to smoke these things and sit there blowing smoke in your face. That never did a lot for me. But that's the way these people are. They don't even try to live what they're teaching. They say and do not. They bind, verse 4, they bind heavy burdens, grievous to be borne, and they lay them on men's shoulders. They themselves will not move one of them with their fingers. That shows you they're not even going to try. But all their works, verse 5, here's the key. Why do they do all these things? To be seen of men. Matthew 23, verse number 5. They make broad their phylacteries. That's that little box on the top of your head that has scriptures in it. They made theirs big. They enlarged the borders of their garments. The Jews had a little border on their garment to show they were God's people. Well, they made theirs a little bigger than everybody else, so everybody could see just how religious they were. They love, verse 6, the uppermost seats at feast. They had special seats for honored guests, just like we still have in some of our occasions today when the congressmen get together. And the chief seats in the synagogue. There were certain seats in the Jewish synagogue that were reserved for special people. Okay, they want those seats. They love greetings in the markets. That's not because they were friendly. They were not. To be called of men, Rabbi, Rabbi. But do not be called Rabbi, verse 8. For one is your master, even Christ, and you are all brethren. And when you have these little titles that distinguish religious teachers from everybody else, that's going against what Christ wanted. He said, you're all brethren. You know, I know my brother, he loved to be called Reverend. And I'm like 7 years old. I mean, in the family, they called him Reverend. I was the only one in the family that wouldn't do it. And I got whipped over and over. I still wouldn't do it. Because I knew what kind of person he was. I was not going to call him that. And I didn't. It wasn't religious reasons, because I just as mean as he was. But he was bigger than me. So you think I'm going to call him Reverend? He'd take me to the show and he'd say, I'm a reverend, I need 10% discount. You know, as a little child, I just thought, what is going on here? That's the way these people are. They love these titles. And look at verse number 9. Call no man your father upon the earth, for one is your Father which is in heaven. Okay, so when I'm a little boy and I call my daddy Father, I'm sinning, right? Well, it says right here, call no man your father on the earth. You have to take it in the context, right? The context is not a little child to his earthly father. The context is religious teachers who have all these titles don't do it. And can you believe it's still done today? This verse is still in the Bible. It's still done today. I got a card in the mail the other day. Reverend H.D. I said, Linda, I don't even know this lady. You got to respect me like her. She says, I ain't calling you Reverend. Well, these titles are exactly what these people loved to separate them from everybody else. But aren't we all supposed to be equal in God's sight? Doesn't our Constitution that men have fought and died for say all men are created equal? Aren't we all of the same value in the sight of God? Then why should I be called by a special title that separates me from the rest of yous? That's what they say at New York. We say y'all from the rest of y'all. Why should I have a little title that separates me from y'all? It's not right. And that's what they loved. Verse 10. Neither be called master, for one is your master, even Christ. But he that is greatest among you shall be your servant. And whosoever shall exalt himself shall be abased. That means to be put down. And whosoever will humble himself, he will be exalted. Woe unto you, scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites! You shut up the kingdom of God against men, for neither will you go in yourselves, neither will you permit them that are entering to go in. Woe unto you, scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites! This is the Son of God. You know, some people cannot imagine, they've never even read Matthew 23. They cannot imagine Jesus saying this to somebody. You're a hypocrite. Well, if anybody could say it, wouldn't it be Jesus? Why? He could read their heart, right? So if anybody could say it, it would be Jesus, and he said it. He said, you're hypocrites. For you devour widows' homes, and for a pretense to make a show, you make long prayer. Therefore you shall receive the greater damnation. Now, can you imagine sweet little Jesus telling people they're going to be damned? That's what he says right here in verse 14. Look at verse 15. Woe unto you, scribes! Now the scribes were the one who copied the law. So they often taught people, since they were familiar with the law, because all day long they were copying it. Woe unto you, scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites, for you compass sea and land to make one proselyte. That means a convert to Judaism. And when he is made, you make him twofold more the child of hell than you yourselves. Can you imagine somebody walking out and saying, boy, that was a good sermon today, preacher. You really made me feel good today. That was really wonderful. You make him twofold more the child of hell than you yourselves. These people are going out converting people to Judaism, and this is what Jesus said about it. Because look what they're converting them to. They're not converting them to true religion. They're converting them to their religion that they've made up. Now the Pharisees, they tended to interpret the Mosaic law in the Mosaic manner, but they believed in what they call the tradition of the elders, which is just writings of men that have been passed down from generation to generation. They considered those to be inspired. And so they believed that was just as inspired as the Scriptures. Now, you run across somebody today that believes some writing that some man wrote is just as inspired in the Bible, just as inspired as the Bible. That's nothing new. That's what the Pharisees believed. Look in 15:9. Jesus talks to them about this. He said, "In vain do they worship me." Your worship can be vain? Is that not what Jesus said? Yes, it can be. My worship can be vain, useless. Useless for me and for God. Why is there, in vain do you worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men? That's what the Pharisees did. They taught as the commandments of God, commandments that came from mere men. So that's the kind of people that Jesus has to deal with. And then when the church is established, the church has got to deal with these jokers. I mean, they don't just float away. The church has got to deal with these people. Then the next group, if I can find it, yeah, here it is. The next group was the Sadducees. These were the aristocrats of the day. You know, they're a little better, like these other jokers here. They're a little better than everybody else. They're religious, and you just ain't got it. They had it, they thought, but the common man didn't have it. Yes. After 70 AD, I don't remember reading anything about those two groups in Jerusalem. Do you, Jeremy? I mean, if you can understand the total destruction of Jerusalem, that was their capital. That was where the temple was. That was where they came to have their 3 feasts, 3 times a year. Every male had to go to Jerusalem 3 times a year for these 3 feasts. Rome just wiped all that out. In 70 AD. Jesus died in about 33 AD. Somewhere in there, 30 to 33 AD. Jesus died. Then you got these Sadducees. They rejected the traditional meaning of the Mosaic law. They have their own laws. They denied there was any such thing as an angel. Where do I read that? Matthew 22, 23. Matthew 23, 8. The Sadducees denied there was a future life. They believe, like our Jehovah's Witness of today, that when you're dead all over. That's what the Sadducees, they didn't believe there's a future life. They didn't believe in any of that. And that's why in Matthew 22, they say to Jesus, okay, you say there's going to be a resurrection. They didn't believe in the resurrection. But in Matthew 22, they're arguing with Jesus. They say, you believe there's a resurrection. All right, we know of a case where this woman outlived 7 husbands. Now, Linda will probably outlive me, but that's only one. Imagine outliving 7 of them. This is one tough lady. She outlived 7 of her husbands, and they're trying to make Jesus look silly. You know, if you don't like somebody and they're teaching something, sometimes you want to make them look silly. They said, all right, who's she going to be in the resurrection? When the resurrection comes, all 7 of these dudes are raised, and this woman's raised. What's going to happen? Look at Matthew 22:29. Here's the answer of Jesus. I can imagine what they thought of this answer. Jesus said, you do err. That word means you are in error. You do err. Why? Why were they in error? He said, not knowing the Scriptures, nor the power of God. See, they didn't believe in the power of God, or they wouldn't deny that God could raise the dead. Why would they deny that? They didn't believe in God's power, and they didn't believe the Scriptures. So when they ask him that, that's his answer to them. You are in error because you don't know the Scriptures and you don't know God's power. And Jesus went on to explain in the resurrection, there is no marriage. They thought they had him trapped, but after he got through with them, they didn't think that any longer. Now, the Sadducees tended to be very, intolerant. You ever known anybody that's intolerant? Well, if you hadn't, let me point some of them out to you right now. Intolerant. They wouldn't listen. They didn't listen to Jesus when he showed them how they were in error. They're intolerant. They tended to be very severe. They had a large part in having Jesus put to death. He had to deal with these people all the time. And they're always attacking him. And they're always trying to destroy him. He had to deal with them all the time. And then when his church started, then the church has got to deal with these people. I mean, they are something else. Now, the next group I want to talk about is the Essenes. This was kind of a cultic group of people. They didn't believe in marriage. They were vegetarians. That's been around a long time. If you do it for health reasons, good for you. I should probably do it too. I'd probably lose about 30 pounds if I'd eat right too. They didn't believe in killing animals. So guess what? When people went to offer their animals at the temple, guess what the Essenes did? They wouldn't go. They wouldn't go to the temple while people were offering animals. They didn't believe in offering animals for sacrifice. It was done all through the Old Testament. These people didn't believe in it. Didn't believe in getting married. I mean, these people are ascetic people. They deny all pleasures of life to themselves. And we know more about them from the Dead Sea Scrolls that were discovered in 1947. You know how they were discovered? When I was a little kid, the best thing I could do, I lived in the country, was throw rocks. You didn't want to mess with me, because I could throw rocks. That's all I did all day, was throw rocks and run and bother people. This little kid throws a rock up in this cave over there by the Dead Sea, and he hears something break, and it gets around, and they go up there and discover the Dead Sea Scrolls. And a lot of the manuscripts from the Old Testament, from the Dead Sea Scrolls, date back 1,000 years than our oldest manuscripts. So it's one of the greatest discoveries in history by a little kid throwing rocks. And if I could have told my mother that when she got on to me, if I'd have known that then, boy, would I had a defense. Throwing a rock up there, they found these Dead Sea Scrolls. I don't really know who threw the rock, but somebody threw a rock up there. I just imagine as a little kid, because that's what I love to do. That's where we learn about the Essenes. Some people believe John the Baptist was raised in the Essene community. Matthew 3:1. In those days came John the Baptist in the wilderness. He was a wilderness type of guy, and so they said he was a Essene. You can't prove that, but I just wanted you to know there's some religious jokers that believe John the Baptist was an Essene. I don't believe you could prove it. The next group I want you to know about is the Zealots. Now, Acts 1:13, one of the apostles was named Simon the Zealot. You know why they were zealots? They were zealous to be free from Roman domination. They committed all kinds of crimes against Roman soldiers, even murder, because they thought, we are God's people. These idiots don't even believe in God. They are not going to rule over us. And so they kept rebelling and kept stirring up rebelling until finally in 70 A.D. the Romans just got tired of it and came in and wiped out Jerusalem, mainly because of the Zealots. Well, what's interesting to me in Acts 1:13, one of the apostles was a zealot. Now think about the apostles. We think 12 sweet little men. And they just got along so well? Not hardly. You know what Matthew was? A publican. Matthew 10:3. Matthew, the apostle, was a publican. Do you know who the publicans were? They were the group of Jews who decided they would collect taxes for the Romans. Just one thing bad about it. They would add their own little percentage in there, above what the state required. They were looked upon as traitors to the Jewish people. And imagine you have one that's a tax collector for the Romans and one that's a zealot. And these people are the apostles. That shows you the power of Jesus in changing people's lives. He knew who they were when he picked them. He knew Simon was a zealot. He knew Matthew was a publican. But here these men who are so different come together and do the greatest work in all the world. So the Zealots are a split from the Pharisees. They refuse to acknowledge any authority but God. They will not recognize any civil authority unless they believe it comes from God. And the Romans were heathens. The great Colosseum in Rome. Do you know what they did in that Colosseum? They didn't play soccer. They didn't play football. You know what they did in that Colosseum? They killed people. Thousands of Christians were killed in that Roman Colosseum. That was their amusement, to see people die. Now, when you got people that get a thrill out of seeing somebody murdered, you got a problem. And that's their main amusement. That's their main thrill in life, is go down there to Colosseum and see those Christians burned up or eaten. They'd let wild animals out there and eat them while they were alive. They just did horrible things to people. And that's who's control of the world, is Rome. That's the kind of world Jesus grew up in. That's the kind of world the church started in. So you have to understand the times that the church lived before you can really understand about the history of the church. Now, though Judaism was split into all these groups, they had one thing in common. They recognized there was only one God, and they all expected the Messiah to come. The problem was, most of them thought he was going to come in on a white horse as a Messiah and run off the Romans. Can you imagine when you're sitting there seeing him do miracles and you're thinking, man, this guy can put it to those Romans. And then you go hear him teach in Matthew 5:44, and he says, love your enemies. Do good to them that hate you and persecute you, and say all manner of evil against you falsely for my name's sake. What do you think they're thinking then? He told them, this is not what I'm here for. Acts 1:6, even the apostles, after his resurrection, they're thinking that way. And they say, okay, are you going to restore the kingdom to Israel now? They're still looking for a physical, earthly kingdom like many are still doing today. They think at the second coming it's going to be a 1,000-year reign of peace on the earth. Now, I want to talk to you just the few minutes we have left about the beginning of the New Testament church on earth. You could spend the rest of your life hours and hours and hours studying where each denomination in each religious group that's claiming to be from Christ, how they began, what's their history, who was their founder, what are their major doctrines. You could spend hours and hours studying that. Isn't it much more refreshing to just go to the Bible and find out when Christ's church started? Look at Matthew 16:18. Jesus made a promise. Upon this rock I will build my church. it's not already there yet. He said, I will build it. And most of you from third grade up know that's future tense. What I want you to do for next time is study for me very carefully Acts chapter 1 and chapter 2. And we're going to note how his church had its beginning. Thank you.